Ruth is 24 years old, and it is a Monday morning in 1958. She sits at a cord board in a Bell System long-distance room, back straight, headset on, skirt smoothed flat over her lap. A laminated script card is clipped to the board in front of her. The jacks are already lighting up. Everything about her, her posture, her voice, her silence, her composure, has been measured. By number 1, you will understand why that composure was not entirely hers. Number 12. The dress that wasn't optional. Before Ruth's first call of the morning, the chief operator had already walked the row. She carried a clipboard. She was looking at the women, not the board. No pants, no miniskirts. Skirts and dresses only, pressed and proper, in colors that did not draw attention. The dress code at Bell System exchanges in the 1950s was strict. In the early decades of telephony, operators wore long black dresses and were not permitted jewelry at all. By Ruth's era, the rules had softened slightly, but the principle had not. A woman arrived dressed the way the company wanted to sound. The clothing was not personal expression. It was the first layer of the company's image, and it started before a single cord was plugged in. The chief operator moved on. Ruth's skirt was flat. The collar of her blouse was clean and starched. The clipboard moved past without stopping. The morning had begun correctly. Number 11. The accent that could end the interview. Ruth's voice passed before she was ever hired. That was not a formality. Bell System telephone exchanges did not employ women with what the company categorized as foreign accents. The policy was documented. Native English speakers were routinely given elocution training to ensure that their speech matched the image the company required. The voice with a smile had a specific sound, and that sound had a class and a background attached to it. Women who did not arrive with the right vowels were trained until the vowels were corrected. Women who could not correct them were not hired. Think about what that means for a job that required only a voice. The product was speech. The product had to sound like a particular kind of woman. Ruth had the right voice. She had been trained to keep it level, pleasant, and unaccented through the full 9-hour shift. The training was thorough. It was also invisible by design. Number 10. The body that had to fit the board. Getting the voice right was not the only test. Before an applicant sat at a Bell System cord board, she passed a physical examination. Height and weight had to fall within certain narrow parameters, because operators spent long shifts sitting in front of floor-to-ceiling cord panels and reaching across them at speed. In some exchanges, arm length was measured to confirm physical reach. The checklist for hiring also required a clear voice, a well-placed timbre, no physical infirmity, and no visible scar on the face. A sound respiratory system and a sound circulatory system. The equipment had a shape. The woman was expected to fit it, not the other way. Ruth fit the board. It was the tape measure. It was the clipboard. Number 9. The silence she kept all day. Ruth sat 3 feet from the woman at the next position. They did not speak. Not a word. Not a whisper. The rule against talking was enforced as firmly as any dress code. Operators were expected to maintain silence between themselves throughout their shifts. One operator from this era described it plainly. They were not allowed to speak even in a whisper for the full 9 hours on duty. Laughing out loud, she said, was the height of recklessness. One woman was reportedly made to work 10 additional hours without pay for a single giggle. The silence was not about professionalism. It was a productivity system. Every word Ruth was allowed to say belonged to a caller. Everything else was noise to be eliminated. 2 women could work side by side for a full day without exchanging a syllable. The cord clicks, the hands move, nothing else. Number 8. The ears that were always there. Ruth knew the call she was on could be monitored at any time. Supervisors at Bell exchanges used a device that operators and labor historians came to call a listening board, a connection that allowed a supervisor to hear a call in progress without the operator's knowledge. In some offices, a manager could unplug a woman's headset mid-call if she was not speaking correctly. The tone, the pace, the volume, the exact phrasing, all of it was subject to review without warning. A call preserved in the AT&T archives captures an operator being shouted at by an angry male caller. Her response was measured and exact. She offered to transfer him to her service assistant, and did so without a single deviation from the script. The caller could be irate. The supervisor could be listening. The operator absorbed both, said nothing unauthorized, and moved to the next cord. The composure Ruth projected was not just for the caller. It was for whoever might be on the other end of the listening board. The cord could be open at any time. Number 7. The friend who was reporting back. If the monitoring from above created one kind of pressure, Bell management designed another kind from within. Labor historians who studied the Bell system documented a practice of appointing what the company called counselor operators, women who were popular on the floor, selected by management to meet privately with coworkers who seemed unhappy or restless. The research is clear about their actual purpose. They were not there to solve personal problems. They were there to reduce what management called disquiet and to channel attitudes toward more productive directions. They functioned, in the documented analysis, as feedback loops to management. Over 500,000 of these counseling meetings took place at Bell between the mid-1930s and the wartime period, and the practice continued in various forms. The counselor sat at the same cordboard as everyone else. She wore the same headset. She had the same first name on her greeting, but she was also listening in a different direction. Ruth might have seen her as a sympathetic ear. The company had a different word for her function. Every rule until now lived inside the room, in the cord panel, the listening device, the chief operator's eye. The next rules were kept somewhere else, in a file, with Ruth's name on the tab. And what that file said about her ring finger, her age, and her paycheck tells a different story about what all the earlier rules were for. Number 6. The ring that could end it. Ruth was 24 and unmarried. That was not irrelevant. Marriage bars policies that fired single women when they married or refused to hire married women altogether affected more than 50% of all office workers at their height, according to economist Claudia Golden's documented research. The telephone and clerical industries were heavily affected. In some Bell System offices through the mid-1950s and beyond, the understanding was quiet but consistent. A ring on the left hand was information. A married woman had a provider. The job, in the company's logic, belonged more legitimately to someone who needed it. Catherine Conroy, a Bell operator in Wisconsin, who became a union leader with the Communications Workers of America, spent years in the 1950s and 1960s filing formal grievances on behalf of telephone operators who had been pushed out or penalized for exactly this reason. The EEOC's very first formal determination on a charge, in the mid-1960s, declared that firing women upon marriage violated Title VII. Before that ruling, the understanding had no name and needed none. The ring was small. The exit it could trigger was not. Number 5. The name she was given to use. Ruth answered every call the same way. Her first name, then the approved phrase. Just her first name. No title, no last name, no formal address. In some Bell System offices, the standard greeting required operators to identify themselves by first name only: warm, familiar, immediately available. The caller on the other end had a full name, a destination, and an account. Ruth had a first name and a script. The supervisors in the room, the chief operators, the women with the clipboards, were called the ladies. That was a title of a kind. It marked authority. The operators below them had first names. That marked availability. The distinction between who received a title and who received only a first name was not accidental. It was built into the daily language of the room. The caller knew whom he was speaking to. He did not know her last name, her years of service, the hundreds of numbers she had memorized, or the precise technical skill she was performing under speed and pressure. He knew she was Ruth. That was enough for the system's purposes. Number 4. The paycheck that the law skipped. The pay envelope arrived weekly. The work inside it was real. The skill was real. The hours were real. The number printed inside was not equal. When Congress passed the Equal Pay Act of 1963, it contained a specific exemption written directly into the law. Switchboard operators, employed by independently owned public telephone companies, with no more than 750 stations, were excluded from its protections. The law that was meant to address the gap had a hole in it shaped exactly like Ruth's job at a smaller regional exchange. More broadly, women in the telephone industry had historically been paid at rates ranging from half to a quarter of their male counterparts. Pay had improved by the 1950s, but the gap had not closed. When AT&T finally faced a formal reckoning before the EEOC, the company agreed in 1973 to $15 million in back wages for women and minority employees, who had been systematically underpaid and blocked from advancement. The operators who received that settlement had waited decades. Many of those most affected by the smaller exchanges were never covered at all. The law had a hole in it. The hole was the shape of her job. Number 3. The skill they renamed personality. Here is what Ruth did at the cordboard on any given morning. She memorized hundreds of numbers. She answered calls in rapid succession, sometimes more than 100 in an hour. She followed a precise script under continuous time pressure. She managed irate, abusive, or disoriented callers without breaking tone. She performed technically exact cordboard operations while listening, speaking, recording, and preparing the next connection simultaneously. She did all of this while seated perfectly still, in silence toward her colleagues, under possible monitoring, for a full shift. The Bell System's official position, documented in labor history, was that these qualities were the exclusive natural possession of the female gender, making femininity itself a formal part of the job qualification. The script card clipped to Ruth's board was not a reminder. It was evidence. The warmth in her voice had been trained, tested, measured, and corrected. The company knew it. The company also knew that calling it personality instead of skill meant it never had to be compensated as a skill. The card was laminated. The warmth was manufactured. The paycheck pretended both were free. Number 2. The file that was already counting. Somewhere in the building where Ruth worked, there was a personnel file with her name on the tab. It had a date. The date was already moving. Telephone operator work was categorized, from its earliest decades, as a young woman's profession. Bell's ideal operator was documented as young, single, and native-born. When automation began reducing operator headcounts through the 1950s and into the 1960s, the women most vulnerable were those who had stayed the longest. Operators who married were expected to leave. Operators who became pregnant were expected to leave. As AT&T installed direct dial switching equipment and reduced the number of positions, the company's official position was that the job losses represented normal turnover, the natural exit of women who would have left anyway. Unions argued it was deliberate technological unemployment, structured around a workforce the company had always treated as temporary. The file didn't threaten, it just counted. Ruth at 24 had years ahead of her. The system had already mapped the ways she might eventually leave, and it had built each one into the entrance. Number 1. The voice that belonged to the company. Ruth unplugged her headset at the end of the shift. The cord looped back into its socket. The jack in front of her went dark. The room was still full of women doing the same thing, the same motion, the same quiet close to the same long day. The work they had done was real. The skill was real. The memory, the speed, the emotional control, the precise and continuous performance of calm, helpfulness, under scrutiny, all of it was real and documented and trained and tested and monitored. What was not real was the premise underneath it. The Bell System formally argued before federal regulators that the voice with a smile was a bona fide occupational qualification, that being female was not incidental to the job but required by it. The logic ran in both directions. Women were naturally suited to patience and pleasantness, which meant their patience and pleasantness were not skills that warranted compensation. They were traits, and traits are not paid. By 1984, the 342,000 telephone switchboard operators of 1,950 had fallen to 40,000. The voice had been industrialized, controlled, and then automated away. The company called the exit natural. In 1950, 1 in every 13 working women in America sat at a cordboard. By the time the reckoning came, many of them had already left through the exits the system had always planned for. The headset went back on the hook. The shift ended. The company kept the voice. Ruth smoothed her skirt on the way out. The same gesture as the morning, the same hands, the same motion. The rules she followed were unwritten by the time they reached her. That was the point. Written rules can be challenged, argued against, changed. The rule that a woman's patience was natural and her composure was free that one never needed to be written down. If someone in your family sat at a cordboard, set a first name into a headset, and left a job the day the rules said to, tell us below, subscribe, and come with us to the next hidden code.